You notice it first in how the room feels useful, comfortable but not warm, close but not intimate. People are present and connections exist, yet something is missing. No one is fully met, no one is fully held. The space works, but it does not care. In this room, relationships move smoothly. Favors are exchanged, time is shared, help is given. Everything looks normal from the outside, friendly even. But the rhythm feels one-sided. One person gains clarity, another offers effort. One receives relief, another carries weight. The user does not rush, they do not demand closeness. They let it happen slowly. They listen just enough. They remember details when it is useful. They disappear when it is not. The relationship stays active but shallow in a specific way. It exists to serve a purpose. You can see it in small patterns. Conversations turn practical. Emotional moments are redirected. Support is accepted but not returned in equal measure. The user stays present when something is needed. When the need passes, so do they. There is no cruelty here. That is important. No insults, no open disregard. The user often appears calm, polite, even appreciative. This is why it takes time to notice. The imbalance hides inside normal behavior. Others begin to adjust. They explain the user's absence. They lower expectations. They try harder. They offer more clarity, more patience, more availability. The relationship becomes something to maintain rather than share. Over time, the pattern stabilizes. The user knows who will respond, who will show up, who will forgive delays. They do not exploit openly. They rely. And reliance, when unreturned, slowly drains the other side. The room feels functional, efficient, like a system where everyone has a role. One person initiates when needed, others respond. Nothing dramatic happens. That is why it lasts. If you watch long enough, you see how difficult it would be to change this dynamic. Asking for more would feel awkward. Pulling away would feel sudden. The relationship has been framed as practical, reasonable, and flexible. No one ever said it was mutual. This is how relationships become tools, not through deception, through repetition, through usefulness replacing closeness, through interaction without connection. The room does not feel empty, it feels occupied, busy, active. But something human has been removed, quietly. What remains is exchange without bond, presence without care, and a connection that works very well for one side while slowly costing the other. Nothing here looks broken. That is the danger. Everything functions, and because it functions, no one asks what it is for. This is where Jung would stop looking at the relationship and start looking at the function it serves. Not the feelings, not the history, the role. The user does not connect to people as people. They connect to what a person provides: support, access, stability, attention. The relationship exists to meet a need that stays unspoken. Jung would say this comes from the unconscious, from early patterns where connection meant survival, not closeness, where people were useful before they were safe. Over time, this shapes how someone relates. Others are not felt deeply, they are sensed for what they offer. The user does not plan this. They rarely think, "I will use this person." It feels natural to them. They show up when something is needed, they withdraw when it is not. The bond turns on and off without guilt because the emotional depth was never fully there to begin with. Jung would notice how the user mirrors enough to keep the connection alive. They listen, they respond, they show interest at the right moments, but the exchange stays shallow. Emotional weight does not travel both ways. The user absorbs, they do not hold. Others often feel confused. They sense closeness, but it never deepens. Support flows in one direction. When they need something back, the response is delayed, practical, or absent. Jung would say this is the unconscious boundary of the user. They cannot give what they do not feel. The shadow here is not cruelty, it is absence. The user learned early that emotional involvement was unnecessary or unsafe. They replaced it with function. Over time, people became extensions of need rather than sources of connection. Those who stay in these relationships often carry their own unconscious patterns. They feel useful, needed, reliable. Jung would say this feeds their shadow too. Being needed feels like being valued, even when care is missing. This is how the pattern locks in. One person relates through use, the other through giving. Neither names it, both feel something familiar. The relationship stabilizes around that familiarity. Jung would not judge this dynamic. He would say it is a meeting of incomplete inner worlds. One avoids depth, the other seeks worth through service. Together, they create a bond that functions without intimacy. And because the unconscious is comfortable with repetition, the pattern repeats. New people step in, the roles stay the same, the user remains calm, the others slowly give more. This is not manipulation in the dramatic sense. It is an unconscious agreement, quiet, efficient, and very hard to see from the inside. This is where Machiavelli would stop caring about connection and start tracking advantage. He would not ask whether the user feels close to others. He would ask what the relationships produce. Who gains time? Who gains access? Who gains relief? And who keeps paying the cost quietly? In work, this pattern becomes clear. The user positions themselves where things pass through them: information, decisions, requests. They do not block, they allow. That is the trick. Others begin to rely on their availability. They become the shortcut, the fixer, the person who makes things easier. And ease is powerful. Machiavelli would notice that the user rarely takes responsibility openly. They let it arrive. Tasks drift toward them because they respond quickly when it benefits them. When it does not, they delay, not enough to be noticed, just enough to redirect effort elsewhere. Over time, others adjust their behavior to match this rhythm. The system begins to protect itself. Colleagues explain the user's absence. They justify delays. They take on extra work to keep things smooth. The user appears reasonable, calm, never confrontational. That makes resistance feel unnecessary. In family and relationships, the same logic applies. The user becomes the point of coordination. Plans run through them. Emotional labor gathers around them. They decide when things are discussed and when they are postponed, not by refusal, by timing. Machiavelli would say this is efficient power. It costs little and returns much. The user does not argue, they do not threaten, they simply remain central. Others orbit because it feels easier than stepping away. If someone challenges the arrangement, the user does not fight. They step back slightly, they let discomfort surface. Often, others rush to restore balance. The system corrects itself because it has already learned where stability lives. Over time, the imbalance becomes normal. The user gains flexibility, others lose it. The user's needs are anticipated, others explain their own. No one decided this. That is what makes it strong. Machiavelli would not call this immoral. He would call it successful design. A structure where control is maintained without exposure, where relationships function as tools because they have been shaped to do so. And once a system like this is in place, undoing it feels costly. Change would require effort. Distance would feel disruptive. So the pattern continues, quietly, efficiently, exactly as designed. This is where Nietzsche would stop watching what is exchanged and start watching what disappears. Not favors, not time, but will. When relationships become tools, something inside the other person slowly weakens, not through force, but through habit. The user does not demand sacrifice. They create conditions where sacrifice feels reasonable. Others choose to give more because it feels useful, productive, mature. Nietzsche would say this is how the will is trained to serve. Without noticing, it has changed direction. Over time, the person being used begins to measure their value through usefulness. Am I helpful? Am I needed? Am I efficient? These questions replace older ones. Am I seen? Am I chosen? Am I cared for? The shift is quiet, but it reshapes identity. Nietzsche would notice how resistance fades, not because it is crushed, but because it feels unnecessary. Why insist on depth when the relationship works? Why ask for more when everything functions? The will bends toward convenience and calls it wisdom. The user benefits from this bending. They remain light, mobile, free. They can step in and out of relationships without carrying emotional weight. Others stay anchored, available, waiting. This imbalance is not dramatic. It feels clean, controlled. Nietzsche would not frame this as victimhood. He would say something else has happened. The person being used has allowed their sense of self to shrink around service. They have chosen usefulness over expression, stability over desire. This is the quiet cost. The relationship does not break, it continues, it functions, but something inside the other person grows smaller. They stop asking for what cannot be delivered. They stop expecting reciprocity. They adapt. The user rarely notices this loss. They see cooperation, reliability, calm. Nietzsche would say that is because the will has been redirected so smoothly that no rupture was required. This is why relationships used as tools last so long. They do not injure openly, they reshape slowly. They reward restraint and call it maturity. Nietzsche would leave this observation without judgment. He would simply note that when will is reduced to function, the relationship may survive, but the person does not remain whole. Until the next observation.